like you. Be strong to hold the powers of the sun. To dream, believe in strength. Now I'm the only one.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Na Dior Pop. Sometimes, music doesn't arrive to impress us. It arrives to sit beside us, quietly, when words are hard to find. In 2026, BTS returned not with noise, not with urgency, but with a name that carries history, longing, and the promise of return. ARIRANG. A song about separation that was never truly an ending. A road walked alone, yet always leading back home. Tonight, we're not just talking about an album announcement. We're listening to what exists between the lines, the silence after the messages, the emotions behind each voice, and the story 7 people chose to tell only after everything changed. So take a breath, stay with the feeling, and let's talk about what ARIRANG really means for BTS and for all of us. In 2026, a single word echoes once again, not merely as a title, but as a meaning that has waited a long time to be spoken fully. ARIRANG. A traditional Korean folk song that has lived for centuries, carrying stories of separation, longing, hope, and the quiet promise of return. And now, BTS chooses that word as the name of their album, not by chance, not without scars, and never without love. When the official announcement of BTS ARIRANG was released, the world seemed to pause for a moment. Not because of extravagant visuals or shocking concepts, but because of the emotional weight that could be felt from the very first second. This was not just a comeback. It was a statement, a marker of time, an answer born from a long journey, walked together and walked apart. For years, BTS traveled a path that was never easy. They grew from small dreams in cramped practice rooms into a global voice heard by millions of hearts. But behind the achievements, there were pauses. There was distance. There was silence. Silence that could not always be explained with words. A time when each of them had to walk alone, rediscovering who they were without the same spotlight beside them. And ARIRANG was born from that space. In the album's opening message, there are no excessive words. No dramatic promises. Only honesty, about time, about change, about longing quietly held close. RM, as the leader, speaks with calm clarity filled with meaning. He describes ARIRANG as a road home. Not a return to the past, but a return to the essence, why they began this journey in the first place. He admits that time has changed many things. The way they think, the way they create, even the way they love music. But one thing has never changed, the desire to tell their story honestly. This album, he says, is a collection of questions and answers they have finally found the courage to voice. Jimin, with his familiar warmth, speaks about waiting. Not about loss, but about endurance. About how time teaches patience, and how distance can make reunion more meaningful. His voice carries comfort, like someone sitting at the same table again after a long journey, smiling softly and saying, "I'm here." Suga does not soften reality. He openly acknowledges moments when music felt heavy, days when words refused to come. But to him, ARIRANG is an album that does not force expression. It allows wounds to breathe. It allows exhaustion to be recognized. And from that honesty, the truest voice emerges, not a shout, but a whisper that survives. J-Hope brings a different kind of light. He does not deny the hardships, but chooses to speak about hope, not the loud kind, but the quiet, steady one. He describes ARIRANG as an album that reminds us happiness does not always mean smiling brightly. Sometimes, happiness is simply continuing to move forward. Continuing to believe, even when certainty wavers. When Jimin shares his message, there is a tremor of emotion that cannot be ignored. He speaks of longing, not only for ARMY, but for the version of himself that once felt fragile. He admits he has learned to accept imperfection. That ARIRANG is a place where he no longer needs to hide his softness. This album, he says, is a hug he hopes anyone listening can feel. V speaks in the language of emotion. He calls ARIRANG the sound of twilight, quiet, wistful, yet beautiful. He does not try to explain everything. He lets feelings speak through tone, through pauses, through the silence between lyrics. For him, this album is not about giving answers, but about accompanying those who are walking alone. And Jungkook, the youngest who grew up in front of the world, speaks with matured sincerity. He admits he has learned many things, about responsibility, about fear, about loving himself without needing to be perfect. ARIRANG, he says, reminds him that he is not alone. That whatever he feels, there is always a place to return to. What makes ARIRANG truly special is not only the music, but its courage to be honest. This album does not try to be grand. It does not demand to be remembered. It simply exists, like a folk song passed down through generations, carrying the same story, yet always feeling new. The title ARIRANG itself is a symbol. A song about separation that is never the end. About sorrow that does not destroy, but shapes. About a long, rugged road that always leads back to reunion. And BTS chooses it in 2026, after everything, as if to say, we have parted, we have walked alone, but we were never truly gone. This album is a mirror. For them. For ARMY. For anyone who has ever felt left behind by time, by change, by a life that moves too fast. ARIRANG does not ask its listeners to be strong. It only asks them to be honest with their feelings. And perhaps that is the deepest meaning behind this announcement. Not merely the return of BTS as a group, but the return of trust, that music can still be a home. That stories can be told without shouting. That these 7 individuals, changed by time and experience, still choose to walk together. In 2026, BTS does not come to prove who they are. They come to remind us that the journey is not over, that wounds can sing, that separation is not the end, and that, just like ARIRANG that never truly fades, BTS will always find their way home. Yet beyond the messages, beyond the carefully chosen words, ARIRANG lives in the spaces between what is said and what is felt. It exists in the silence after the music fades, in the breath held a second too long before a lyric begins, in the quiet realization that this album was never meant to rush anyone forward, it was meant to let them stay. Because ARIRANG is not an album that asks, "Are you ready to move on?" It gently asks, "Are you ready to feel?" For BTS, 2026 is not about reclaiming a throne or proving relevance. It is about acknowledging the cost of the road they walked. Fame gave them a voice, but time taught them how fragile that voice could feel when carried alone. Each member learned something different during the years of distance, about solitude, pressure, identity, and survival beyond applause. And that learning is woven into ARIRANG. This album does not chase perfection. It embraces cracks. The kind of cracks that let light through. The kind that turn pain into resonance instead of noise. Every track feels like a letter never sent, finally opened. Not to explain everything, but to say, I was here. I felt this. There is a quiet maturity in the way BTS presents ARIRANG. No urgency. No need to compete with their own past. They understand now that legacy is not built by repeating peaks, but by daring to stand still and tell the truth. And the truth is this. They changed. ARMY changed. The world changed. But the connection, though stretched, never disappeared. ARIRANG becomes the bridge between then and now. Between who they were and who they chose to become. It holds grief without dramatizing it. It honors joy without exaggeration. It allows sadness to exist without demanding resolution. For ARMY, this album feels less like being pulled forward and more like being invited to sit beside them. To remember the nights spent waiting. The moments of uncertainty. The fear that distance might slowly turn into goodbye. Yet ARIRANG answers that fear softly, not with promises, but with presence. There is something deeply human about BTS choosing a folk song as their anchor. ARIRANG was never owned by one voice. It belongs to everyone who has ever sung it differently, yet carried the same emotion. In that way, BTS is not placing themselves above history, they are stepping into it. They are saying, we are part of this story too. A story about leaving and returning. About endurance rather than triumph. About love that survives silence. As the album unfolds, one feeling remains constant: gratitude. Not loud gratitude, but the kind that sits heavy in the chest. Gratitude for time. For patience. For listeners who stayed even when nothing was promised. And perhaps that is why ARIRANG feels so intimate. It does not perform emotion. It confesses it. It understands that healing is not linear. That reunion does not erase scars. That walking together again does not mean forgetting how to walk alone. BTS does not hide these truths, they let them breathe inside the music. In doing so, they give permission to everyone listening to do the same. To admit exhaustion. To accept change. To mourn versions of themselves that no longer exist, without resentment. ARIRANG is not asking for celebration. It is asking for understanding. And when the last note fades, what remains is not closure, but continuity. A sense that the journey is ongoing, quieter perhaps, but deeper. That BTS is no longer chasing the world, they are walking with it. In 2026, BTS stands not as 7 boys chasing a dream, nor as untouchable icons, but as 7 people who chose honesty over spectacle. They did not return louder. They returned truer. And just like the song that inspired it, ARIRANG will continue to be sung. In different voices. In different times. By anyone who has ever loved deeply, lost something along the way, and still believed in the possibility of coming home.